Greenstuff sculpting. For many, this is something that seems like a mystical art. This is a skill that needs plenty of practice and to be refined over time. The top sculptors have spent thousands of hours practicing their craft. Well, today I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for improving your Greenstuff sculpting if you haven't quite hit that level yet. When I first got into the hobby, we were still using almost exclusively pewter miniatures, which were far from easy to convert or to kit bash. It was also well before the time of YouTube and social media to actually be able to find tips and tricks on how to improve. Nevertheless, I still attempted it and definitely ruined a few miniatures and a few tools too. As a teenager, I never got the hang of it. I always struggled with the cutting, the filing of the metal pieces, of actually getting the super glue to actually stick where it should. And to be honest, my Greenstuff work never looked even close to what it should. When I returned to the hobby as an adult, however, things all changed. With a flurry of new multi-part kits, just made kit bashing and converting so much easier. Whether it be the old style multi-part Space Marines, which were essentially completely interchangeable, or whether it be the slightly newer Primaris ones that do need a little bit of cutting and a little bit of cleaning up to be able to convert. It's so much easier now. Now, because of the advent of kits like this, it meant that I could put that little bit more time into working on my Greenstuff sculpting and onto those little details that make a conversion or a kit bash just so much nicer. Now, having YouTube and social media around today to pick up tips and tricks is a pretty big boon, but I'll always say that it's better to have a mentor. And for me, in this journey, I had two. These mentors were my friend Ben, otherwise known as Requiem82 on Instagram, and my friend Chris, otherwise known as Questionable Loyalties. I've mentioned both of these on my channel previously, as over the last few years I did learn a lot off them when coming back into the hobby. Whilst a considerable amount of piss taking does tend to occur in our hobby sessions, I will say that these two have taught me a great many things and made my return to the hobby considerably easier. And all of this in exchange for a few hundred Jaffa cakes. So today I'm going to pass on some of their sagely wisdom by showing you my top 5 tips to improve your Greenstuff sculpting. Tip number 1, as with many things in life, is not always about the tools, it's more the person using them, but selecting the right set of tools can really make your life easier. I've seen people trying to use all manner of different tools, and to a point different people will have different levels of success with various tools. But if you're wanting to start out, or if you're looking to improve, then for me a decent set of dentistry probes or some wax carvers are an absolute essential. I've seen people trying to use things like craft or kitchen knives to sculpt, and whilst there is definitely a place for a craft knife within sculpting, it's definitely not a go-to tool. Instead, a real simple set of probes or wax carvers is definitely the way to go. Within a set of wax carvers, you'll find a range of different shapes and styles, rounded tools for ensuring a nice smooth finish, or sharp, pointed or edge tools for getting those lovely straight lines. You don't need anything fancy here though. Simple is definitely better, and to be honest, to this day, I don't think I've found a job that this little guy hasn't been able to do for me. These can be picked up very easily through many hobby stores, but I've actually found that eBay and Amazon can be great places to pick these up. A set of wax carvers will set you back probably only about £10, and this will give you a tool for almost any situation. Another tool that I've noticed being particularly popular recently is the simple colour shaper. These tools have a range of uses within the art community and are often used for oil painting or for using things such as structure paste. For our purposes, however, they can be pretty good for sculpting. Built like a paintbrush but with a soft silicone tip, they can be absolutely superb for smoothing out large surfaces or when doing a little spot of gap filling. The soft tip means that it will flex easily, meaning that you can get a nice smooth finish if you use a nice gentle touch. Don't expect them to do any real heavy lifting though, as with the softer tips it can be tougher to get the control that you would get with a set of wax carvers. For creating particular shapes or for getting straight edges, the wax carvers will definitely serve you much better. A real simple tip: keep your tools clean. Much like with brushes, it does very much pay to look after your tools. Not only will it prolong the life of these tools, but it'll also improve your sculpting. Greenstuff and Milliput are by nature pretty tacky, which is how they stick to your models. This does however mean that you can easily get residue building up on your tools. By letting this residue build up, you'll find that it's going to be much more difficult to use, as the friction caused between the tool and the material you're working on will stop you from getting nice smooth finishes, and in the worst case scenario it will cause the material to stick to the tool and pull it away from the model. By cleaning your tools after every use, you can keep them nice and shiny and residue free. Whether it's something as simple as just wiping them down, or whether you give them a proper clean with some warm water. If you have a build up of putty on the blade, then a simple craft knife will easily be able to remove it, and if it's fully set then it should just break off. This will however ruin your craft knife if done too many times though, and do be careful, it's very easy to cut yourself doing this. Now this is tip number 3, but probably the most important of the lot. As I've mentioned earlier, epoxy putties like Greenstuff and Milliput are inherently pretty tacky. This is great as it means that the putty will stick nicely to your miniatures, but it does also mean that it will try and stick to your tools as well. I'm not going to go into science of why this happens, as that would be incredibly boring, but it doesn't take a scientist to realise that it's not ideal. So what you need to do is to find something to act as a barrier between the tool and the putty, while still allowing you to manipulate it nicely. You can use things like Vaseline or baby oil to do this job, but by far the easiest and most cost-effective way is just by keeping your tools nice and moist with a bit of water. Regularly dunking your sculpting tool in a pot of water will prevent it from sticking to the putty as you work with it, allowing you to shape and to smooth the putty considerably easier. This is especially important when it's fresh, as a freshly mixed putty is considerably more sticky than putty that has been left to cure for a little while. If you're less caring about health and hygiene, then yes, saliva will work just as well, but obviously I wouldn't condone this at all. This is a tip that sounds pretty simple, and to be honest it is, but it is also super important. Epoxy putty works by mixing the yellow filler and the blue hardener to form a nice green putty, and depending on how you mix it, it can have slightly different properties. For the majority of jobs, you normally want to get a fairly nice even 50-50 mix of the blue and the yellow. This will give you a nice combination of workability and cure time. By mixing in a higher proportion of the yellow filler, you'll get a softer and more easily workable putty that does also give you quite a bit more time to work with it. This is generally better if you're working on finer details such as chainmail, fur or hair, but do be mindful that it won't be quite as strong, so you do need to look after it a bit better. By adding in a higher proportion of the blue hardener, it has the opposite effect. Doing this will give you a putty that will set stronger and harder and will cure quicker. It will however be a little bit more difficult to work with and not quite so good when trying to do the very fine detail. If you are doing gap filling or larger surface areas without too much detail, then actually this will probably serve you better, and even more so if you're in a little bit of a time crunch. And now for the final tip. This is definitely one that did take me quite a while to learn, and I will say it very much did not occur to my beginner's brain, but don't be afraid to let the Greenstuff cure for a little while. You really don't have to do everything straight away. As mentioned earlier in this video, as Greenstuff sets, its properties will change. It will obviously become harder, but it will also become a lot less tacky, And due to this, it makes it considerably easier to be able to get nice smooth surfaces, and actually also quite a lot easier to get sharper edges on things. How long you want to leave it will depend a lot on personal preference and on what job you're actually intending on doing with it, but generally Greenstuff has a working time of around 1.5 to 2 hours. By leaving it approximately 20 to 30 minutes, it'll be quite a lot firmer than when it was freshly mixed, so it's important to get it in place and to get the rough shape of what you want as soon as possible. And then having left it to cure a little while, this is when you then go back in to finish off those shapes and to start smoothing things off. By doing this, you'll be able to get those nice sharper edges on things like this dragon scaling, or be able to get a nice smooth surface if working on something like a cloak or some robes. Now for a final little bonus tip, Jaffa cakes are essentially conversion fuel. If you ever find yourself struggling for ideas or having difficulty with a particular sculpt, then take a break, make yourself a cup of tea and find yourself some Jaffa cakes. You'd be shocked at the number of awesome conversions that have been thought up over a pack of Jaffa cakes and a cup of tea in my local store. So there we go guys, that was my 5 simple tips on how to improve your Greenstuff sculpting skills. Good Greenstuff sculpting is actually a skill that I feel is being lost a little bit in the hobby nowadays. As mentioned earlier, with the advent of the new multi-part plastic kits, it's become that much easier to do conversions and kit bashes nowadays. The need for being able to sculpt some details onto your models is not really there now, because you can just find a piece from another kit in the range, or even delve into other ranges and other companies. There's definitely something to be said, however, for being able to sculpt well. By sculpting, you can do things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to find parts for. So as mentioned, doing things like some battered robes on a Space Marine captain. You can find them, but actually being able to get robes to fit and to work around the model perfectly, it's not an easy feat. As many of you guys watching my videos seem to prefer the grimdark style of painting, actually being able to kit bash and convert effectively is really key for properly embracing the grimdark. Whether you be converting up some horrific twisted mutant of a paint engine for your Drakari, or as mentioned doing some nice battered robes on a Space Marine Sergeant or Captain, actually Greenstuff really is your friend. If you've got some value out of this video, then please let me know by hitting that like button or by dropping a comment down below. If you've not already hit that subscribe button, then I have a few more grimdark tutorials coming up very soon, and I've also planned 2 diorama builds that would be a shame for you to miss. I've also now begun streaming right here on YouTube every Tuesday night at 8 PM. This week I had the absolutely awesome Elster Nation appear as my guest and as my babysitter, and whilst we did intend on doing a lot of painting, this didn't really happen. We ended up talking for the vast majority of it. But in the future there will be a lot more painting involved, and as I get more comfortable with the platform, hopefully some live tutorials. But for now guys, the final piece of advice that I will leave you is this: if all else fails, spray it black and start again.